and how I'm connected to all of this. And then we'll go around and do quick introductions. So I work for an organization called Welcoming International, and we work with communities all across the world, helping them become more inclusive to immigrants, to refugees, and to everyone in their communities. And I am a volunteer with this project, which is a project to try to bring together leaders from different sectors all across the world on different topics around achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the coalition is called Catalyst 2030. I mean, it's really very much volunteer led. And so some people have volunteered to take on different topics that have been identified over a long process, really over a year and a half, and I have not been involved through that whole process. But I'm someone who works on this topic, and the organizer had asked if I could play some kind of a volunteer role. And so here I am, just trying to play a role in this topic of the SDGs around social cohesion and peace. And so we have a group now that has met once before. It's a small group of practitioners, and Kristen was on the one other call that we had, who I see again. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if a couple other people join as well. But our task is to identify together, sort of come up with, in this moment, what we feel needs to be achieved as far as social cohesion and peace, which is no small feat given the current circumstances. There are, COVID-19 and the rise in the racial justice and police reform movements. All of these things are challenges and opportunities at the same time. But COVID is clearly a challenge to social cohesion and to peace. And so really efforts that are one sector working by themselves or a small number of organizations isn't going to get us to where we need to go in a time of, frankly, of potential crisis. And so the timing for an initiative that's about systems change, about working across sectors, is really very good. And so that's the experiment that you all are now a part of. And so today on the call, we have what they're asking us to do is create a policy document that just creates some potential recommendations for policymakers at the national level, at the international level, meaning supranational national organizations like the UN, and at the local level, for how we could advance social cohesion collectively and peace collectively at this time. And so in the chat for the conversation, I have a Google Doc linked, and I think you should be able to get you should be able to access it. I figured out, I think, how to get it now so that you don't need to be invited to see it. But if you can go to the chat, you'll see the Google Doc. And a lot of this meeting is going to be talking about, interventions that you all either are working on or are aware of that could be part of recommendations for a system change approach, a global system change approach to addressing the real challenges and opportunities of, advancing social cohesion in a time of pandemic. So with that, I'll just say we're gonna each of us introduce ourselves briefly, just our name, our organization, where we're based, maybe a sentence about what we do, and then we'll move into the Google Doc and just start getting everyone's feedback on some of the initial concepts, and then getting your inputs into interventions that we feel should be on this list. And there will be, like July 1st and 2nd, there will be some convenings, virtual convenings happening with some policymakers to sort of launch these different policy recommendations. And the group will continue working after that in efforts to try to get resources to advance this, to advance these projects along with the other topics and other projects that are happening simultaneously. But again, our first step is to try to identify some real innovations that could be scaled. So let's start with introductions. Again, I've already introduced myself. So let's just go around the little box, series of boxes that we have on the screen. And if everyone could just, again, name, organization, where you're based, and one sentence about what your organization does. That would be terrific.
Hello, this is Jahangir Chaudhary. I'm from Bangladesh. I teach at the University of Dhaka. My area of research is microfinance, poverty, inequality, entrepreneurship, environment, and sustainable development. I also work with Professor Yunus, the Nobel Peace Laureate. I'm an academic advisor to him. And we also work on different issues on peace, entrepreneurship, microfinance in different countries. Currently, we are working in Colombia. We are going to start a project in East African countries next year from this year as well. And we are also thinking about another project in Brazil on Amazon forest next year. I have my educational background is like I did my master's from the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh, and then I did my PhD from the United Kingdom on microfinance and poverty. So looking forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Terrific. Welcome, Jahangir. Welcome. Thank you for that. Who wants to go next? And welcome to Jeroo, who's the behind-the-scenes mastermind of all of this. Jeroo Billimoria is now on the call. So good to see you, Jeroo. Oh, can't hear you, but that's okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Hi, Jeroo.
Nice to be on this call. I'm sorry I'm attending a lot, so I'll be jumping in and out, but I really wanted to listen to this discussion.
Thank you.
So thanks for having me.
We'll take you when we got you. All right, who wants to go next?
I can go briefly. My name is Lola Pack. I'm the communications director at Welcoming America, which works with Welcoming International. I just popped in to say hello to David, and I look forward to hearing more of the discussion.
Thanks, Lola.
Yeah, no, my name is luvuyo. I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa. My work is more on the assisting many young people from the connectivity around internet and skilling to find employment and starting their businesses. So we basically in the township, in the rural areas, in the areas where the access, the connectivity becomes much more a problem. So I've been doing this for the last 16 years. We've trained large numbers of my young people. Many of them, they run their enterprises now. And so it's a topic that I really much more want to engage to see how and I can able to contribute, also can able to learn from the topic.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey everybody, my name is Kristen Powell. I'm here with the organization, the Center for Policing Equity. We are primarily based in the US with some global launches, but we work primarily with law enforcement to reduce racial disparities in policing.
Obviously, Tristan, more timely than even the last time we all spoke together.
So it's been a busy month. It's been a very, very busy month, and I'm excited to talk today about how even how this one moment has really changed the landscape and how we talk about policy too. Definitely,
I look forward to it. Extremely timely. I mean, I should say that I forgot to mention where I'm based. I'm based in Berlin. I've been here for about 2 years, and yeah, I started Welcoming America back in 2009, and then became the head of when we were doing more and more international work, I became the head of the Welcoming International project, which is part of Welcoming America. But yeah, it's interesting to see the differences in social cohesion right now between America and Germany, for example. But yeah, these are momentous and important times that we're living in. And so yeah, let's get into the work, if that's okay with everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't have our Catalyst 2030 host introduce herself. Let's do that too.
Hi, yeah, my name is Ranjali and I'm the intern at Catalyst 2030. So I'm providing tech support, but I'm looking forward to this discussion as well, as I study a lot of this in college.
Wonderful. Please feel free to contribute in any way you want to, Ranjali. We're happy to have you as part of the group. Wonderful. So my next question is, can all of you see the Google document. Is everyone in front of a computer and able to see the chat that I sent so they can access the document? I heard someone for a second, and I didn't hear them anymore. Uh-oh, it might be your connection. Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, you can see it. You can see the document, Luvuyo?
I can see it now.
Okay, terrific, terrific.
Okay, thank you.
How about the others on the call? Can they see it as well?
Yeah, I see the link for the Google Doc in the chat. I think it just got placed there.
Yeah. Oh, there's another one got placed. But yeah, that's the one. Oh, I see. So Jahangir said I don't see as well. Do you see it now, Jahangir?
I can see it now.
Oh, good. Wonderful. Great, great, great. Okay. So yeah, as I said, the primary thing we want to work on is what jeroo likes to call shovel-ready solutions, which means solutions that have been tested and that we think that really could contribute to you know, advancing social cohesion in these times. And so the primary goal is to really just get some background on any perspectives you have, you meaning all of you have on programs or policies that could be scaled in this time as part of the recommendations. But first, we're just gonna, you know, if you have a chance, the background in the document mostly just talks about you know, where we are in the world. The fact that social cohesion it's not the best time in the world for social cohesion, but there are some opportunities right now. There are signs of increased solidarity in some settings, in some places, you know, due to the virus, which we don't think will stay around, but there could be some temporary opportunities, but there's, like we said, a lot of challenges, and we need to be able to really name those challenges, name the fact that it's serious. And then I had put in here something about the role of cities because, and I'll be curious to hear what people think because that'll come up when I talk later. Our experience at Welcome International is that it's often easier to advance some of these social cohesion programs and policies starting at the local level and then maybe bringing it up to the national or international level. And cities have played a role sort of under the radar of advancing social cohesion and inclusion already for years now. And there's an increasing number of networks of cities that are doing that around the world. So I felt it was important to lift that up, but it's not the only piece. And then Kristen, I think, did you add the piece here around the role of states influencing national actions? Or was
So actually, I think
no.
Christina maybe
Christina.
brought up that part. But
Okay.
I did think that was interesting because you had propositioned sort of the local, like if you move from the local level, it brings such a strong value. And then Christina said at the state level, where it can have such strong influence. And then the policy proposals that I added were at the national level. And I would love to talk further about, you know, what our thinking is in all of that.
Yeah,
because it sounds like there's value in all of it, but it's interesting that we all came from a different perspective there.
and I think that's actually a good thing. I think, yeah, in the end, we need change at all levels. And so if we have strategies moving at different levels or starting at different levels, they all need to move through all the levels of government, of governance, in my opinion. But yeah, Christina is from Families for Freedom, which is an organization that works against detention, primarily in the United States, but they're also part of international networks of organizations that do this work. And so, yeah, her colleague was on the last call, and Christina contributed here to this part of the document. But I'm gonna move us, if it's okay. Let me see. I think there's one other thing at the top that I forgot to mention. At the top of the document, this is something we tried to put together previously around, you know, what's the overall goal of this initiative now, and it's not perfect. But as you can see, it says we strive to build on the current increases in collaboration and participation among champions of social cohesion, inclusion, anti-racism, and peace, to advance cohesion and inclusion in our communities and worldwide in the face of mounting threats, taking into account ability, racial, ethnic, or gender differences. So yeah, I do want to make sure people, again, not that it's perfect, but that it's okay. It sort of can encapsulate what we're talking as best as possible, what we're talking about as we advance into the policies that are going to support that. Any feedback on that that statement? Are we missing anything? But yeah, any feedback on that?
David, sorry, I have to jump on another call. And I just wanted to say one thing, that when I read it and when I was thinking, there's a lot of talk just now on police reform, which is mainly at the state and the local government level. And I know that Center for Policing Reform is, policing equity, sorry, is probably at the forefront of police reform and how police reform actually can lead to greater social cohesion. So I was wondering whether that could be put in very strongly, because that is something when we speak to cities can also become a major thing. And when we invite mayors and all, so we can say that we are approaching this from both ends and making the police more humane, because I know in the US a lot has happened, but even in India, the police people are sick and they were being beaten up, you know, which was ridiculous. So it's not just racial inequity, that is, I think, very, very common. But it's also just the inhumanity with COVID, which has happened. So all the stuff that you're doing, if we can put that forward, so we are looking at it from a prevention point of view, a protection point of view. So we're sort of looking at it from the whole continuum. And if we can sort of look at it that way, then it becomes a very concrete, immediate proposal to put to the mayor's assembly or whoever when we want to put this forward. Because I'm sure this is a forefront for everybody. So that's why I was thinking if we can put this along with, so two sides to the continuum. Am I making sense?
Totally. And I think we'll talk to Kristen about that, because I totally agree. And I think it could make its way into this statement at the top, and then it will definitely make its way towards the top of the recommendations. Because for sure, it's extremely important, and it's really also very heartening that it's finally getting its, I would say, more of its due. But yes, Drew, we will carry on in that, keeping that emphasis. But thank you.
And my last point, sorry, this is as a migrant in Europe. When we look at social cohesion, can we also touch on some of the migration issues which we had discussed? And how migrants are always, so it's ethnicity, race, you know, the whole thing, and how we can be more welcoming, which is your main thing, David, but looking at it from that point of view. And looking at language and, you know, not getting the right jobs, so having more proactive employment policies at the city and country level, all of those things.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is a topic very close to my heart. Sorry. So whatever happens, this is something I'm going to jump in on. So sorry if I'm butting in. I normally never speak in a session, but so sorry.
We're lucky, Jira. If you're passionate about this topic, it's going to move.
Yeah, that's incredible insight. this is really helpful to have pieced together. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jeroo. And yes, we want you to continue being passionate about this issue and helping us to advance this because we'll need your help. Jeroo can literally move mountains.
Thanks. I have to run, but thanks
Yes.
a million, guys, and I'll connect with both of you, with you later. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
So that's great. Yeah, it really is a blessing if Jeroo is going to be supporting this, passionate about this topic, because yeah, she's organized a ton of funders around this Catalyst 2030, a ton of leaders, government, social entrepreneurship. She's an impressive leader, and that's a very promising thing if she wants to help us on this topic in particular. But going back to the statement, I have, just based on Jeroo's comments, I've added 2 or 3 things that I'll point out, but then would definitely like to hear from Kristen about how we might add something directly into this top statement. Nothing like about specific policies, but I think language would be useful if other people agree. And then, yeah, I want to hear from Jahangir. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And luvuyo, I hope I'm doing it as well. But we'd love to hear from you about this statement so far, and anything that you think should be, if you think it looks good, or if you think anything should be added or subtracted. I'll say quickly the things that I've added, and then I want to hear from Kristen first, and then from our other colleagues, and Lola too, if you are inclined to, Lola. We strive, pardon me, as far as the things that have been added, that I added after listening to Jeroo. One is adding, let me see, taking into account, I added taking into account racial, ethnic, I added migration status. It reminded me that if we don't write sexual orientation and we say gender, given the recent US Supreme Court ruling, it's not so clear. Even if we had said sex, it wouldn't be totally clear. And I think it's important to add that. And then as far as the piece around policing and how it could be worded, or protection, or whatever wording, what do you think, Kristen? Is there a possibility of adding any language in here around that?
So yes, it may take me a minute I may want to come back and hammer out like the specific language of it. I think the overall idea is that right now when we meet disparities with resources, those resources have historically just been law enforcement. And the problem with that is that means that every single need from mental health to public health is just being met with the same badge and gun, the same set of tools every time. And part of our big idea to advance social cohesion and peace forward is to reevaluate what resources communities, especially the most vulnerable communities, in the U.S. and mostly Black and Brown communities, but in other places maybe the primarily the immigrant communities, whatever it is, and ensure that the tools and resources the most vulnerable communities there are receiving things that actually help to grow and sustain that community rather than punish it for whatever. I know that like a lot of conversations right now in the U.S. are about this idea of defunding the police, and the idea is that you take resources that are historically in law enforcement and instead you give them to therapists or to homeless shelters, to domestic violence support, and essentially refunnel them into better ways that, again, help to grow the community rather than detract from it. We are, at the Center for Policing Equity, we're still trying to figure out the best path forward on this because it is moving really fast. And I don't know if, certainly the idea of totally dismantling dismantling law enforcement seems highly unlikely. But there is a lot of work that can be done in terms of reform, and there is a lot of value in defunding some concepts or cutting budgets and still funneling that money into communities that have been asking for it for a long time. So I think I might need to take a minute to think about how that fits best into here.
That's fine.
I don't know if that.
No, that's helpful, and you know, we can definitely figure that out over time too. Yeah. We don't necessarily have to figure it out right this second. And it would be a little different in this opening sort of goal of the group than it would be in the sort of the policy recommendations underneath. But I don't have it on my head either exactly what that would be. So let's take some time.
I want to find a strong way to integrate it and not derail from or detract from any other point. So it should obviously stay cohesive. And this is a difficulty of tackling a lot of issues head on at the same time, and making sure that they all feel balanced. So let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, exactly. Systems change is noble but not easy. But yeah, that sounds good, and I appreciate your sentiments and wanting to keep it sort of flowing with the rest. So anyone else on the call have any feedback on the statement and anything that they want to see change or think it looks good as is?
I would like to make a comment after listening to both of you, that actually in America, what I understand is that the main problem lies with the training of police people. You know, this is a big problem. I think somehow the training process that they get is faulty. And because in Bangladesh, we say that, you know, when armed forces people get trained, and they are taught that civilians are bloody, you know, they are always their enemies, you know. So this is what the understanding is. And I'm somehow, I perceive that in America, the police people are taught in the indirectly or somehow that black people are bad. And they are going to be the criminals, and they have got all the bad qualities. This is how directly or indirectly these things are taught to the police people. I think the whole process, you know, training process needs to be actually revised and reviewed again by a you know, there should be a commission or something like that, which is going to look at that thing, and they need to look at how this training process creates a more inclusive environment in the society, you know, how this training is aligned with the civil, political, social, and economic rights of marginalized people. Okay, so I think that is a problem, and this needs to be actually looked at. And then and how, you know, they need to actually the budget that given to police people needs to be actually looked at, how this budget is justified, the amount that is spent, how it is justified with respect to other social problems. You see, in America, lots of people are poor. Lots of people are denied of, you know, their rights, you know, related to education and health. In America, if you look at the insurance sector, the prices of medicine or the Medicare system, you are going to see that, you know, these insurance companies are charging the prices which are, you know, are abnormally high compared to their production costs. So you see, you need to look at, unless you look at those issues, those which create inequality in the society, especially those who are creating harm to the marginalized people, without solving this problem, you cannot simply solve the problem related to police. So these things are interrelated. Police is not an island in the society, is not isolated. It's the problems that are now we can see related to police are created by the institutional setups or social setups that we have in the societies. The problem that you are seeing in America, we have also similar problems in Bangladesh. You see, in Bangladesh, we consider police is one of the most corrupt, you know, sectors in the society, in the country. And they are the things that you see the same thing our police people also do in Bangladesh, but your things are actually visible. Those things come to the media. In Bangladesh, these things do not come to the media because our media is regulated and media doesn't have that much freedom. So unless you actually look at the social problems as well as, look at the problems related to the police and combine these two things together, you cannot solve the problem. And you cannot solve this problem in the short term. You'll have to have a long-term policy to look at the issue. So these are my initial comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahangir. And that's really helpful to start with. I would like to come back to you after we go, I think after we get Luvuyo's comments, but also I'd love to hear, now that we heard some of your feedback on the police reform and definitely how it's connected to all of these other social ills that are, destroying social cohesion, access to opportunity. I'd like to hear about a little bit about some solutions to some of those other problems, some innovative solutions that you're seeing around those, addressing those structural problems that you were describing. So let's come back to that. I want to hear from you on that. And I want to hear from Kristen because Jahangir talked about policing, but then moved on to some of these underlying issues, but it was also building on what you were talking about on policing. So let's in a minute go to policing. But before, Luvuyo, do you have any other comments about the initial statement? Are you feeling okay about it?
No. I think I'm okay with it. I think it covers many things around collaboration, racism, inclusion, accountability. I think it's kind of like covered. I think maybe from a general, because I could much more relate and connect in terms of what's happening in terms of being marginalized Black in South Africa. I mean, through the apartheid, where the brutalization around the police in terms of it was a way to enforce the system to extend that then the marginalized can be able to get kind of a fear that comes in now. And I think it's been funny enough in the last 26 years, there's not much more change so much. I mean, from a policy point of view, there's amazing policy that are there to look at this thing, to look at in terms of the rights of individuals, not being victimized, being protected. But I mean, in reality, I mean, you still find, kind of like some stories that are taking place. So we are not yet living in that cohesion where there's peace and where people are living together. We still find, and I think probably based on the poverty and inequality that makes it that probably difficult, in that regard. And I think from an African point of view, from South African point of view, it becomes a problem that because then the local people feel that they've been left out through the system, that the anger, they make it to the closer brothers from Africa, and then you find xenophobia that comes in because of saying that you're taking our jobs, you're taking our girlfriend, you're taking our opportunities because you are probably cheaper, you're not being protected, you don't pay tax, and then for us, we've been not being able to find those opportunities. I mean, people are kind of, so you find a stronger kind of a reverse way that taking place with the anger that taking place in that regard, because it's also is an area that has to happen around Africa in terms of as brotherhood. We're not yet in the space where we able to work together because it was designed that way to make sure that there's a division, that people cannot work together, they can see themselves as a difference. And I think also you see a much more bigger movement now, I think on the LGBT, you see in terms of, there's a huge aspect in terms of being victimized and not being able to live in a situation which is harmony, where people can be accepted who they are and being grateful around that. But you've got stories that people have been raped, people have been murdered because of the choice of my preferred choice that I've taken. So there's also another area where you could see this comes in. But I think just like kind of saying that, it's a funny thing that in terms of this kind of like policy, they could be there, but you could get a reversal now in a way where because of the structural and systematic issues around poverty that makes people now to resolve with these kind of ways of doing things now. So yeah, before I'm probably saying what could be solutions, but I think this is probably where you see that, because we we are a kind of a country that from Omadiba Mandela, where there's Ubuntu, but behind the scene, there's also some kind of a challenge that we still feel today.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And the specific personal examples are really powerful and helpful. So thank you, luvuyo. So sorry, Kristen, Vic McKinney has joined us. So I did want to welcome Vic and see, make sure you could introduce yourself, Vic, just to say your name, organization, where you're based. And then we're gonna, I want to orient you a little bit, and then we'll keep the conversation going. But if you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourself, that'd be terrific.
Thanks, David. Sorry to join the group so late. I was just catching up on work. My name is Vic McKinney. I'm almost 52 years old. I also grew up in South Africa. I grew up in a very privileged background as a white South African, middle class, and the son of two immigrants from the UK. So at a young age, I became disabled. I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down from the age of 19. So I've led an interesting life in terms of becoming disabled in this country, and then got very involved with community development and childhood places of safety for children with disabilities in the townships, soon after 1990 onwards. So I've seen some amazing transformation happen in this country and what it's capable of, but also like what luvuyo is indicated, we have fantastic policy, a fantastic kind of outlook, but if anything, we've learned the lesson where you need to put implementation strategies that match those policies and really get people together as much as possible to learn from each other. And I think that's challenging, and there are a lot of external factors that can affect that. So, and then I involved with a group called Shanakup, Social Enterprise, which make and manufacture wheelchairs and assistive devices predominantly. And linked to that, we have the Uhamba Foundation, which is dedicated to trying to include children and adults with disabilities and their families in an inclusive society. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, Vic. That's terrific. Thank you so much for that. And Vic, there is, if you're in the Zoom's main screen and you press the chat option on the bottom,
yes.
you should maybe you've already accessed. We're all looking at a Google Doc, and I'm not sure if you are as well, but if you're not, it might be helpful for you to do that.
I'm on the chat thing, but there's nothing here I can see. Is the messages here? You talked about a statement earlier. Can you put that for me again?
Yeah, let's see. How can I get this to you? Can you see the Zoom group chat?
Yeah, I've got it open, but it's just blank because I've joined late, probably.
Okay, let me try. Yeah, okay, Lola just.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Lola. Can you see it now?
Yes, got it. Thanks.
Thanks for the assist there, Lola.
Thanks, Lola.
Great. So good. So now, yeah, let's move back into police reform. We've gotten some good impressions. I'm not the best note taker in the world. I'm just trying to get some of these ideas down. So let's try to just feel free to everybody live in this document and contribute in this document. Kristen, since we were up at the top of the document when you were mentioning some of the policy reforms that you were suggesting before, they're not yet reflected down here on the bottom where it says 3 police reform. And so yeah, if you wouldn't mind either through writing or through speaking, crystallizing what and maybe to your point before, an alternative to defunding the police, where your thinking would lie if you wanted to see a program or policy scaled throughout the world right now, in this moment where there's recognition that there, at least among many, not all, that there is a problem. And so sorry to ask you to do it again a little bit, but
no problem. Let me just roll up my sleeves and give an easy solution. Just kidding. That's the tough part, right?
Get your shovel out. Get your shovel out.
Here's my shovel. So yesterday we actually added our list of 5 recommendations, and these recommendations have come from a lot of research that was done with Yale's Justice Collaboratory that studies specifically procedural justice in policing, and the Center for Policing Equity. And so sort of an analysis of data and policy and sort of thinking, where can we move from here? And our final solution, our final recommendation was to create a national review board because it sort of lends itself to communicating how complicated these issues are. The thought is that if you just treat a single incident like an isolated incident, so if you just treat the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd as a bad cop who did a bad job in a bad city in a bad police department, then what you do is you detract from the larger issues that we need police reform at a federal level, right? And so all that to say that while earlier I know we talked, let me slip this in here now, I think that a lot of reform will happen at the local level in terms of change, right? But we tend to advocate too that there's some big moves at the federal level, at the national level, because of accountability that a small city has to their big state or that a state has to their country. Because of resources, a lot of times people will say that we can't make these changes because they're expensive. And for a small town, a small township, likely they are expensive and likely they don't have those resources readily available. In LA or New York, you can slash a police budget by $15 million and it won't make a difference, but you can slash a similar budget in a small town by $1 million and it will end the police department. So a big part of this is to have funding available and federal oversight to make that happen. So I wanted to speak a little bit too to the training piece of this because this has come up a lot lately. Training has a lot of value, and I think sometimes we sort of combine training and culture, right? So training is sort of these 8-hour sessions that officers are required to go to. They have several hundreds of hours of training that's required to ever become an officer, and then annually they have an expected 40 or 50 extra hours of training. But the problem with training is that it's once a year, so it's not as helpful. Most of what officers learn is going to be on the job. And when there are disparities in behavioral perceptions or seeing certain vulnerable communities as having, it being more criminal, as like being less in need of help, that's a culture thing. And so training can do a little bit. And we at the Center for Policing Equity ran an initiative to implement trainings in 6 cities, one of them being Minneapolis, where this most recent event happened. And that has been a lot to sit with too. But what happens when you do the training is you come in, you do it, you teach the whole department, but then it's still going to be needed because it still needs to be at the forefront of the way that you're approaching any situation. And the problem is that there's also ballistics training and combat training and all the other types of training that are also being taught to be at the forefront. And so part of it is very much changing the culture, right? The priorities of the department so that they are pushing forth the beliefs of helping somebody, not just crime and punishment sort of responses, right? So I think that this is a reason that we're latching onto policy, and right now that we're latching on the policy at a national level is, one, it's asked for, and that's great. That never is. So if we can lean on that, this is a perfect opportunity to. But also because policy can be the most explicit version of it. I'm sure everybody has received an email from some organization. Is it Uber? Is it a dog food company you buy from? Who has suddenly taken a stance on racism, right? And each of them are coming out and they're saying, you know what, we realize that only 1% of the people at our company are Black, and we want to change that, and we're starting that, and here's how. Or, we realize that we only use sellers that are white, and we're changing that, and here's how, right? And this is sort of a really good example of what that change can look like and what happens, I think, particularly as we think about this, when everybody is doing the same thing, right? Because part of how we got here wasn't just policing it in a vacuum, right? It happens in a system. And so you're going to have culture coming out from every way, whether it's the books that you're exposed to, the media that you're exposed to. And so when entire industries take a stand on this stuff, you're going to see a very different systems change. And so I don't know if there's a way to talk about that part of how it isn't just about training police to do better. It's about turning our culture into a different one. And that requires every single person to put the onus on themselves, on their own company, on their own way that they fund, that they invest, and also at the policy level, that we create new rules about how we do this work. And so I apologize, that was a tangent, but what I really want to say with that is that whatever company that has sent you that email has given you explicit guidelines for what they're doing moving forward. They have said that from now on, we are going to have these policies in place to ensure that doesn't happen. And the value of policy is when it's written well and when it's written explicitly, that's an incredible benchmark that you can lean on. So I think part of it is creating strong policies that are very explicit, so that you can really latch on to them. So for example, we have been working the last few weeks on policies around eliminating entirely chokeholds. So, and that's 100% elimination, not reducing, not moving towards the idea of no longer using chokeholds. It is just the entire abolition of them. And because that's a clear policy, that has a clear outcome, and then it's very clear when someone does or does not use one. And similarly, we want to capitalize on this moment and try to create a policy around creating a registry for cops who have failed their communities, right? Who have stepped out of bounds, who have injured somebody, who have a lot of complaints against them, so that they can't just leave and get hired somewhere else. So, and why that's important, I think, is because if just one department does a really good job, like San Francisco, then the next department that does a bad job, they have no change because they're operating in a silo. So I think a big part of this is going to be continuing to make this work move forward, so that no department, no organization gets left behind, that if we do this work, we have to do it totally aligned across industries, totally aligned across national policy, as much as we can across global policy on these issues, so that as we're moving forward, it's as a full unit and we're leaving old ways behind us.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Thanks so much. Super, super helpful. And there's some notes that I've taken. There's obviously the extensive notes that you have in here. I want you to keep adding thoughts and underlining within what you've written, with the pieces that you think are the most sort of crucial to be included. As you know, I'll work to try to distill some of this stuff within the paper, but the paper will continue to be open for all of us to look at and work at together. They wanted us to get it by tomorrow, but I think Monday is the most realistic, so we'll figure that out.
Okay.
But we'll go back to jeroo and say, this is your important topic, so can we have an extra day to do it? Let's hear from someone else about, we've talked now and we've heard about other areas that are leading to lack of opportunity, lack of cohesion, lack of basically fair societies. I would love to hear about specific interventions to turn that around in whatever area. It can be disability, it can be poverty, it can be gender, but just other interventions that you all have seen or worked on or are fans of that we could include as examples of types of interventions that we would want to scale or help scale through government, through other means around the world.
Hi, Dave, it's Vic.
Hi, Vic.
Everybody jump at once. I'm sorry I joined late again, but just from my experience, I'm an academic. I've become an academic researcher and lecturer, and so what I've found powerful, and especially the process we went through in South Africa, we went through a process called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, the TRC, where people had a chance to tell their story. And I've often thought it would be valuable for every country to do this, especially a country like the States, because the TRC was like a process of not so much court hearings, but people had their voice heard. People who were, mamas from the back of shacks in some township somewhere and suffered tremendous brutality or violence or some injustice under the apartheid system. And then people from all different walks of life got to tell their story, on a national platform that was led by sort of iconic leaders like Bishop Tutu, etc. And it was a respected and a healing process that went through a lot of steps and was covered. And I think different stories are told that people there, but what it meant at the end of the day, that no one could turn around and say, I didn't know what happened. Or I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know, I wasn't involved. It didn't concern me. Because if you're a part of this country, we're part of what was happening here. And I just let everybody, it gave people a chance to share their story. And also was, I think, a step forward towards healing. I think you can't just automatically say, here's policy, this is it, love your neighbor, etc. We're going to make equal employment, education, etc. It can't just happen. It needs to happen in steps. And I think you want to, where possible, you want various steps to happen at different stages, depending on the context. So I think, coming back to my point of view, I is trying to get stories like that interwoven in education, and particularly higher education is my passion. So I now lecture to my students who are often medical doctors or students becoming doctors, and I'm in a wheelchair and I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down. And because I talk from my wheelchair, I have a lived experience of what I've been doing. And I think it has an impact because it's a story that's told, especially concerning people with disabilities in this country. And I think the same applies to anyone who is marginalized, whether it's from race, gender, etc. We have a lot of programs and a lot of policy put in place, especially within higher education. We've just had a transformation happening now in terms of getting equal education and the whole fees must fall process, where there's been a protest to lessen the exclusivity of higher education. And it has this debate around that and how even University of Cape Town, which is quite one of the oldest universities, probably the oldest in South Africa, and didn't quite recognize the intrinsic sort of racial boundaries that it created around itself just through the developing culture and maintaining what it was. It's done many things and many advanced things towards breaking that, but often I think until an event happens, often a tragic event I think happens, you don't really realize how it affects people's lives. I'm trying to lose the crux of the matter, but I think to me, come back to education and just make people see other people's stories is vital in this process. One more thing, I got my doctorate a couple of years ago, and as part of my postdoc, I wanted to explore how law students were being prepared to promote and maintain the rights of people with disabilities. Because people with disabilities in this country have very little access to justice. I'm not sure about other countries. So we have, there's a lot of physical and abuse that happens with the disabled, etc. And we might have, say, girls with intellectual impairments coming up in court and being represented, but the justice system is not set up to represent them adequately and properly. And do lawyers know how to handle this? Do they know how, etc. And so if the system isn't welcoming, then it's impossible for that to promote and maintain the rights in that context. So it's looking at all different areas and just getting to the crux of it. My supervisor and I sat down and said, well, you're creating lawyers and it's an interesting profession, but how do we make sure that our graduates have compassion, have an awareness of social justice? How do you educate that? And how do you evaluate and assess that even as they go through the graduation? So that's something to leave it as well to think about.
Thank you. That's really, really
If
helpful.
that helps.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the truth and reconciliation example was particularly powerful to me. So thank you for sharing. But all of this, all of your personal story also is extremely, can be brought up to the level of policy as well. But this whole idea of telling your story is so powerful. Yeah, it's great. Really, really great. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks. Because just when you my master's looked at education and the inclusion of students with disabilities in education, particularly intellectual impairment. And what was discovered, and I found this trend then extends into the rest of life. When you're in what we call primary school or your first school, so up to like grade 7, up to like age of 12, 13, everything's kind of inclusive and you can play at different ages, play together. Once you get to the high school, it becomes competitive and you start working towards grades and graduating. And that something along that competitiveness and the adolescence and innocence gets lost, and we often lose track of an inclusivity that's important. And it takes us many years in life again to find that again through experience. So how do we maintain the qualities that are important in life in terms of social cohesion and not lose that through this competitive? You suddenly working towards my grade. It doesn't matter what I learn as long as I get the marks right. Yeah.
Thanks, Vic. That's great.
Pleasure.
Thank you. So yeah, let's hear from. I'm going to put luvuyo and Jahangir on the spot. And luvuyo, I mean, you both have shared some examples already, and I want to make sure to get them again crystallized. And I appreciate luvuyo sharing also personal experience around how police, the way police enforced, systems that were racist or exploitative in both South Africa, still do. What about some solutions, even if they're on a small community level or other ways? Can you offer up solutions around social cohesion, peace, inclusion that could be added to the list? And yeah, added.
Yeah, no. I mean, like I've kind of this is kind of like a difficult. Part of like it's ongoing on because you're dealing with structural things, systematic thing now, yeah. And I think I've seen from Cape Town that you find people who were born in here for many years that they never go to township. And you find some, people coming in the country and foreigners were able to come in and visit and able to interact. And I think through the understanding, I normally that you take Table Mountain to Kailij, and that integration and also understanding and exposing and able to know how people interact, how people come together now. So those kind of like you find they are amazing projects where it brings people together to able to come together and then to talk. You need to have, we call it imbizos, which is dialogue.
Can you spell that? I want to get that.
Imbizo is IMBIZO. So it's imbizos. It's a kind of you sit in the crowd and then it's like everyone talks. No one has got any hierarchy. People can raise and they can share what they go through. They can share what like they're dealing with. Everyone is not judging, no lunch. It's kind of like a space where it's like safe space, but a space that people are really, expressing themselves in that regard. So you call that kind of a space where you from a race point of view, you bring everyone together, they dialogue, they have a conversation, and they talk and they share the stories, and you kind of been amazed in terms of how their relationship comes in now, how themselves people are coming out and reaching out and say, how can we work together? What's kind of an opportunity around that? And I think those kind of things, if they can be emphasized, not become a talk shop or people invite them, but it becomes a way of how do we do things now. A visit, you take, schools from a township, you bring them in Rondebosch, the experience in Rondebosch, and then Rondebosch, you get in Kai Township, and experience so they can know in terms of different lives that, and you could understand, because it's more about empathy. It's more about, to understand where I come from. So it's more, the social engagement and sometimes, from a police point of view, it's kind of, sometimes it's driven by people themselves. that they could see, I mean, we want to see change more than from a government point of view. Because probably if you're driven from a government, sometimes it becomes a political thing. And that becomes a problem, because the poison, because you find out, I mean, people don't associate with it, and it has to come real. So we've seen many great examples of unity. People are reaching out now, and then now the township becomes a space where people want to go out to chill and have time and spend and encouraging. I think where it's still a biggest problem, it's around entrepreneurship, around economic participation. I think this is where the biggest problem in terms of how do you open up the market? How do you bring, I mean, people to make sure that they able to be supported, and then you create a platform for locals so that they can able to. So I think this is where I think from socially, I think things that can be done. But I think economically, I think this has to be a kind of a way that has to be addressed. And I think more than anything, it's about the education.
So is that, can I ask how the organization that you work with, Luvuyo, addresses the entrepreneurship barriers?
Well, I think what we do, I mean, like we have called, we said the name of the township, it's a Kasi Business Networks. I mean, monthly Kasi networks where we invite 3 speakers who are doing amazing. It's either from an entrepreneurship point of view, or for funding or opportunity or technology, come in, share. So we have local entrepreneur who share his journey in terms of how I'm doing my business. We have an entrepreneur who's done it amazing, or you have an organization like a bank or funding comes in and share. And then that becomes a space now where the question and answer, but there's a network in terms of people are kind of reaching out now, have opportunity to learn. So we've been having these things for the last 7 years, every monthly for a find. And it becomes like different race, different kind of people are coming in together, and then we made them to be in the township where we see there's no opportunity in that regard. And those are events. And once a year, we'll have a full day conference where we have the full day conference. So some can stay in the township, some can able to use everything has been procured around to stimulate the economic participation around the space. So it's part of the way we're saying that, I mean, we need to stimulate more young entrepreneur, that they see no race, they see opportunity, they kind of connect it, and I think that's kind of how you kind of like bridge that gap that we cannot be accessing to many people.
That's great. It's really, really tangible, helpful, perfect. Thank you. That's great. All right, now we're going to put Jahangir on the spot.
Can I jump in just real quick?
Sure,
I have a quick question. I don't know, Luvuyo, Vic, who might want to speak to this. We also really believe that reconciliation sessions have incredible power in this work and are an incredible way to build compassion. A question that always comes up is how to scale it, like how you, and so I'm just curious for both of you, how do you ensure that it's big enough yet small enough, and is a good representation of people, and do you do it often, or how do you ensure that it, you know, is happening at a scalable level as a solution?
No, I think, I mean, I'll come in if we could probably come in. I mean, like I mean, it's still, I mean, today, probably took place in 2006, but the impact of Reconciliation Commission, it's huge even today, in the sense that it was kind of amplified nationally, to the extent that it was more like before social media times, televised, every story was being shared. Every case, what happens, it was more being able to be taken, I mean, place in the sense that, I mean, like, I mean, the guys, the commissioner who were involved, there were no any alignments in any political things. It was more genuinely to find the truth, to find the healing, to find justice, and to make sure that what happens in the past, it never happened again. But you provide that kind of a space where people comes in over a period of time. And people were wounded. I mean, where they were brutally by systems, and not only the affected family, because I mean, any Black person will never an opportunity to be able to do anything that you want. You becomes a boss for the master, but it makes it everyone to realize that we come from a past which was brutally. We need to build this country to make sure that, I mean, in anything that we do, I mean, like with a way of doing, I mean, we find a way differently. So it was more, it was a national thing. It was driven from a government point of view. I mean, independence, to tell the truth in terms of what happens in the apartheid, and that truth is still, I mean, it's just like, I mean, most like people, there were not many, I mean, others, they went to jail. Others never went to jail now, but just like other families, they will feel to grieve. And it's normal. In any transition, there will be those one who grieve, but it was kind of a beautiful platform that was created to deal with the past and talk up. And I think that's where it's like, but where it's missing in, it was, we never have a reconciliation of the soul. We look at the injustice, we look at the past, but that's why you find so much violence in South Africa, because we never have an opportunity to able to have a reconciliation. Maybe it's probably something that can be looked at, what happens in terms of emotional, psychological, in terms of many families.
Thanks, Luvuyo. Does anyone else want to, that's very helpful. Does anyone else want to comment about scaling? It's clearly in South Africa, it was helpful that there were government, both leadership and resources from government to help to scale the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Other ideas, and thank you for sharing sort of the depth of why it worked, or at least why it had an impact. Nothing fully ever works, but how did it have an impact? So yeah, does anyone else want to share? And I have thoughts as well, but I just want to open the floor first for any thoughts on how you scale, dialogue. What was the wonderful word? Imbizo. How does one scale Imbizo? Any other ideas?
I don't have a set idea, and I think Kristen's raised a very interesting point, and something that's so hard to quantify. I think, though, at a very basic human level, I would almost turn the question on its head and say, no matter what scale it happens, it's a vital step forward. Whether you have it between a couple, between a family, between a community, between a national platform, if you have that dialogue open and facilitated, it will have an impact, and will have a vital impact towards healing, especially when there's been trauma in the past. And so it's almost it's trying to put that at the forefront of a healing process, and a transformation process. And we know dialogue is a way to go. But we've got to put this, recognizing the truth of the past, right at the forefront where people can share their stories. And I think I don't have an answer how to measure it exactly, but my response would be automatically that it is a vital part of any process, no matter what scale it is happening. I'm not quite adding to the answer, but I think it should be an integral part of every process. Yeah, that can make sense.
A good point. Thanks, Vic. I'm just going to take off my facilitator hat just for a second to say that this has been a question that we've also dealt with at Welcoming America, Welcoming International. Because yeah, we started in one community that had a huge backlash to immigrants and refugees, growing in Nashville and Tennessee. And we developed a methodology that involved dialogue and changing the messages that people heard about migrants to be much more attuned with the reality, not the fake. So yeah, but after we were able to do that in one community, that was the question: how do we make this happen more broadly? And even in Nashville, the question was how do we make this happen all over the community? Well, I mean, over time, what we've come to is that local government is an important ally in this, and national government, when you can have a national government. No, Ben, sorry, buddy. Okay. Sorry, everybody, that's my son, Ben. Yeah, that's the world we live in. But yeah, so what I was saying, yeah, so scaling, we found that if you can demonstrate that there's a benefit to the community to investing in dialogue, like for example, Nashville, it actually led to more economic gains once they became more welcoming. Businesses want to be in a place that's where their employees are going to feel welcome. It meant better, more social cohesion in the community. When you can show that there's benefits, like tangible benefits at the community level, you can then spur other places to want to do that investment also. And we also, the business community saw how it was in their best interest. And so it might sound cynical or not, but for us, aligning reconciliation with you know, with actually positive outcomes for communities has been the key to the scaling. And we have, I mean, we're in 200 cities in the US and hundreds of communities around the world. And that's been the underlying kind of force, I would say, in making that happen. So it's one approach, not the only approach. It's one tool in the toolbox. So I do want to, and Jahangir, you can say if you'd rather not, but I do want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to provide some shovel-ready examples of things that we might want to scale. We've got a lot of great stuff now in this document from this conversation today, in our heads that need to make their way onto paper from this conversation today, from the last conversation, but just want to continue to get one or two more examples and then talk about the process after that. But I do want to open the floor to Jahangir. And if you'd rather pass, that's fine too, but I want to give you the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Basically, I actually got interested in this webinar because of the reason that I had an academic paper on impact of social cohesion on the recovery of natural disaster losses at the household level in Bangladesh. I wrote a paper for the OECD, Organization of Economic Development Cooperation, headquartered in Paris. So they invited me actually to make the presentation, to present what are the impacts of social cohesion at the household level. So in that paper, actually, we had data at the household level. We collected data after a natural disaster, that a cyclone happened in Bangladesh in the southern part. And we found that, interestingly, the social cohesion was the most effective thing for recovering the losses rather than other aspects. So that means within the society, if you have got like a good cohesion, cohesive, that actually helps households to recover. So that was my finding actually. So the point that I'm trying to make is that if you look at the definition of social cohesion, it's a broader thing actually. It's much broader than the term that we use called social capital. It's much broader than that. In social cohesion, we include income, employment, education, and health. Also, from the perspective of the inequality in all these aspects. So until or unless actually you can reduce inequality in all these four aspects, you won't be able to achieve a better socially cohesive society actually. And at the end of the day, defunding of police in America is not going to solve the problem actually fully. And you have to actually look at, not police itself is not the problem in America fully. You have, and the whole process is inbuilt in the society, and the racial discrimination and inequality, these aspects are inbuilt in the society. Unless you try to solve the problems, these problems for totally, and your defunding of police is not going to, or dismantling of police is not going to work at all. I don't think so. So what you need to actually look at and pursue the policymakers, or use this uprising to motivate the policymakers that to look at the inequality or disparity that you have in these aspects: income, employment, education, health, and through reducing inequality and disparity in these aspects, you can get a better, cohesive society. And that is actually is going to gradually help the mindset of police as well, and the mindset of the whole society. And it's not about actually the minorities or the black people. You need to actually convince the majority of the white people as well. Because white people are the majority. If they are not convinced, if their mindset is not changed, then whatever you do is not going to work. So to change the mindset, you need to look at your education system first. How your students are taught, about the racial things. You know, the importance of minorities in the society, the contribution of minorities in the society, how Black people have contributed to the society for the last, 100 or 200 years. You need to teach these things in the classroom so that white people understand, the children, white children also understand that these Black people are also important. They need to, you need to put this education in their mindset, in that, from the childhood. So until unless you do this, the whole thing is not true. So you have to look at to make the change, you need to change the society first. And to change the society, you need to change the education system. And this is what my understanding is.
That's very helpful. One last follow-up question on that, and then we're going to talk about process. We're going to be out of time to do much more. Maybe one more closing statement from one other person. But in the Bangladesh example, and please, if you could, Jahangir, if you're open to it, can you send me the paper, and I can share it with the group. It would be great to see it if it's public. I don't know if it's public yet or not.
Yeah, I of course I can. Yeah, of course I can share that paper with you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I forgot to give you some examples from Bangladesh part. You see, in Bangladesh, in America, you are lucky that you can raise your voice. You can talk against police or the policymakers. But in Bangladesh, we don't have even that privilege. We don't have that right even. We cannot say anything against the police. Whatever they want, they can do. And their budget is going up gradually, day by day, and disproportionately, their budget is going up. And at the same time, the budget for the education and health is not going up at the same rate. So even we cannot say this thing. We cannot raise our voice. So if we raise our voice, our fate is going to be disastrous. So this is what the problem is.
That is a big problem, to say the least. I do have one final question from your paper, which we'll see, and I'm excited to see it. Was there an intervention, because they found that, or you found that social cohesion increased, it was the single biggest factor for improving outcomes after, I think if I understood correctly, after natural disasters. Was there an intervention to advance that social cohesion, or was it something that just happened organically? What was the way that took place?
No. We looked at the social circle that exists in that society organically, naturally.
Got it.
We didn't look at the impact of any interventions to promote social cohesion. We looked at the natural organic cohesion that exists in the society. How does it help people when the society or that village or that area or locality faces a natural disaster?
Got it. That's great. That's really helpful. So it's now 4:22 my time. Different 22s for different folks on the call, but we know that the final number is 30. So I do want to talk about next steps and see if anyone has any comments or questions about that. So the next step, it's not totally clear when the paper is due, maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday. I'll try to be communicating about that once I find out from jeroo or somebody else at One Family Foundation. Anyway, the job now is to try to do a very possible job of trying to distill a lot of this down, not just the very rich, because it has been an extremely rich conversation today. It's very inspiring conversation for me. Luvuyo wrote and said that it's, thank you, it's been an amazing conversation. I feel that way. I was very moved by everyone on this call and their contributions. And so, yeah, now the goal will be to try to distill ideas that were talked about and emphasized on this call, ideas that have been put into the Google document during the call or before the call, some of the ideas that were brought together from the last call, and to create this policy brief, which is just another step forward. It's not the end, but it will be sort of a little bit of a blueprint for some of the things that we could recommend to be scaled. as part of this initiative, the broader Catalyst 2030 initiative. And honestly, beyond the policy briefs and on July 1st and 2nd, the presentation of those briefs to some policymakers, I don't know if Catalyst 2030 even totally knows what the plan will be to advance beyond that, but I do know that they have, fortunately, they have resources. They've found significant funders who want to see this work, and so I'm cautiously optimistic that we can move into something beyond just a policy brief, into actually putting these ideas really into motion, and trying to do that in a collective way, all of us together. So all of you will be mentioned in this policy brief, and I would like to see it as a draft, and something that will continuously need to be updated. We've gotten some small slices of the world of social cohesion champions, but it's just a small slice, so we can't say that it'll be the end all be all. But I do encourage any of you, all of you, to add anything that you would like into the Google Doc. If anyone would like to play a bigger role in the document besides editing online, if they want to have a conversation, or if they want to just say, I'd like to get you some feedback by whenever, I invite you to do that. The minimum is hopefully that you'll read the Google Doc and add any thoughts that you have. The maximum is actually helping to write it more actively, which some people have already done. They've already contributed, but as it goes back and forth, if you want to be part of that back and forth, just let me know. And then we'll do what we can to have something for ideally Monday, maybe Friday, but I would say ideally Monday. And then, work with Catalyst 2030, who has all the emails and everything else, to make sure that we're able to communicate with everyone about how this continues to move forward. And it's all, like I said, it's all an experiment, but I mean, today as a judge, I like this experiment. Like if we can have these kind of conversations across countries and sectors, and start to think about how it's all connected, that's not the way the system is designed, honestly. Like, the system is much more, I find, like even the philanthropic system sort of focuses on individual champions or organizations to solve social problems. And if it's not how it works in the real world, you can't solve social problems in a silo, and no savior organization can save a social problem. And so just getting that conversation moving forward is a step in the right direction that I'm happy to be a part of. But hopefully it'll become more than that. Hopefully we can really turn this into action. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for your patience as we figure out how to keep this moving forward. And please, let me write down my email here too. I trust that I will get all of some of your emails, but I trust I will eventually get all of your emails from Catalyst 2030 or from One Family Foundation. But that's my email, and feel free to email me. I definitely, Jahangir, want to see the paper. I know everybody does, but there's so much, and the more we can contribute to this, the better. But thank you for for thinking differently, for spending time doing something that's not what we always do, and let's move this forward. But thank you everybody.
Thank you.